Thank you.
Okay, 12:45. Okay, we'll go to item 14, the Akaroa Health Centre, because I think that should be pretty straightforward. Yes. Gavin, hello. So the significant Akaroa area health facility. So just give us a very quick high-level explanation of what this is about.
The Akaroa Community Health Trust has asked the council to make a grants targeted rate grant to it to complete its funding obligations to the Canterbury District Health Board for a new health centre in Akaroa. They've asked for up to $1.3 million and have asked that we look at that being funded by a targeted rate on all properties in the Akaroa area. So we have looked at that, done some modelling of the rate requirement, some options in terms of time frames, and those have come back now through a recommendation from the Banks Peninsula Community Board. We've done some work in recent days on exactly how the consultation might be undertaken. We think we are now at have an approach that will provide the council with some comfort regarding the views of the affected residents and keep within the time frame to enable a decision to be made before the rate strike in June this year.
Okay, so we are simply facilitating this upfront payment on behalf of the community to provide for their piece of the funding of the health facility, and we will recoup the money through a targeted rate. That's
correct. It's entirely proposed by the Akaroa Community Health Trust.
Okie dokie. And this is really just outlining what process the consultation will take.
Correct.
Okie dokie. Any questions? Andrew?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first of which relates to the content of the consultation documents if we go ahead with this, because it's obviously important that the consultation documents have questions and prompts in them that will allow the hearings panel to have the information put in front of it to allow it to do its job effectively in terms of the latter part of this resolution. Clearly it's important that we get that right. And the other thing I'm looking at is, and these two comments do relate to the question I'm about to ask, the difference between the original Community Board recommendations and what we've got in front of us now, realising that there's some practical aspects as to why we need to do things differently than the Community Board had requested us to. The Community Board had requested the ability to formally approve the consultation document before it went out. Clearly that's not going to be possible because of timing constraints, so that we can get this done by the annual plan. But the Community Board presumably will have the ability to have sight of and informally comment on the consultation document before it goes out, because there's a level of local knowledge held by that Community Board that I think will be useful in that regard.
Absolutely. The board will be consulted on the contents of the document, and as you say, their understanding of their local community is a valuable part of how we communicate on an issue like this.
Yeah, and we would expect that there will be questions in that consultation document that would gauge both the level of support and level of participation. Well, in fact, encourage a level of support and level of participation, so that the hearings panel has got, that information in front of it as well. I think they'll be the things the Community Board will be looking for, given the comments in the original Community Board recommendations. So can I request that there be a clear focus on how we both achieve and quantify level of support and level of participation?
Certainly there will be a question, a closed question as to whether people support or not the proposal, and that in itself will give the hearings panel a clear view of the absolute level of support, and the number of submissions we receive back will give the hearings panel an indication of the breadth of support across the community, so they will have the information they need to make a considered decision.
Thank you. And then one other area of difference. In the community board recommendation, they had asked that, in fact, in the original staff recommendation, which is referenced as the preferred option in the community board recommendation, the item 2 of the original staff recommendation, 2B, that the rate be calculated on a proportional basis according to the capital value of each rating unit. So that's value-based rating. What we've got here agrees the amount of the grant will be recovered through a fixed charge targeted rate. You would then go to the revenue and financing policy as it was amended coming out of the LTP last year, which seems to conflict with that original staff recommendation. So I'm interested why the staff recommendation was for a value-based rate, whereas the revenue and financing policy in the relevant paragraph will usually be set, so targeted rate will usually be set as a fixed dollar charge per SUIP because this provides the most readily available revenue stream. Capital value or other rating basis will only be used if this is considered to generate very significant equity benefits. So interesting that we had an original staff recommendation to the community board that seemed to conflict with our own policy. And obviously there will be a view or some views in the Akaroa community about targeted rates, fixed or value-based. I'm just keen to tease that out now so that we can confidently proceed, assuming this is carried today on the basis that we're proposing.
The revenue and financing policy does say that normally we would use a fixed charge, and that's an efficient way for the council to set a rate and to collect that rate. It's also a very clear way to communicate the impact it'll have on each individual ratepayer so that it'll all be the same. The original recommendation was based on possible affordability issues for some residents, and so there needs to be a weighing up of whether that is in actual fact a significant matter to be considered in terms of equity, or whether it is something that is overridden, if you like, by the efficiency of a fixed charge. So at the current recommendation, as I understand it, is for a fixed charge, and that's a perfectly appropriate way of doing it under the council's policy.
Yeah, so that reflects, so the staff recommendation is now in line with the policy, or the recommendation, or the proposal here is in line with the policy. And I guess to some extent that's mitigated by the option of a 4-year or 10-year spread of the rate, which to some extent mitigates the affordability, and residents will have the ability to comment on that during the consultation period.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions? Okay. Look, I'm happy to move this. Do I have a seconder? Seconded Sarah. If there's no further questions, I'll open it for debate. Andrew?
I'll just make some brief comments on this because, you know, clearly the community board had certain expectations when they put their recommendations through. I've communicated informally back to the community board the reasons why we're needing to look at this differently, particularly because of timing, and also the need, as we attempted to express it at the community board, to be able to quantify the level of support required, and also the level of participation required, because of course the result of this, if it's adopted as a targeted rate in the upcoming annual plan, will be that the whole community is rated by way of that targeted rate. We need to make sure that we run a fair, transparent and equitable process at every turn as we achieve that. But I'd certainly like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the work that the Health Hub Trust have done. It's great that they've done significant planning work and partnership work with the DHB and others to get this project to where it is, including significant fundraising that means that we're looking at a far shorter gap to be filled by, a far smaller gap to be filled by way of the targeted rate than we otherwise would. But I would also stress to councillors that our job here today is to make decisions around, first of all, our appetite in principle to look at a targeted rate, and then our decision to go out for consultation with the Akaroa subdivision community to determine their appetite for it. So, we've got to where we've got to. The Health Trust have got to where they've got to in terms of the environment that we're making this decision in, and I certainly commend the work that they've done. Our decision today really is just to focus on this mechanism and what that targeted rate might look like. I'm supportive of this. The question really is, are we supportive of the community being able to have the say on a matter which is important for the community in a number of ways? It's about the ability for health facilities to be provided to an extent that allows people to remain in Akaroa, to age in place, to remain in their own community when they need those services. And it's also about the ability of the Akaroa community to have their say on how that is funded and whether they are in agreement with funding that by way of a targeted rate. The council really is only involved because of that change that we made to our revenue and financing policy, and because we already have a relationship with Akaroa ratepayers, because either they live in our district or they own property in our district and therefore receive a rates demand from us. So I think this is an entirely appropriate use of the change that we made in the long-term plan last year. I'm absolutely in favour of asking the community whether they're in favour of this process or not. The only way we can do that is through a robust consultation process, and from the answers to the questions I asked, I'm certainly very confident that we'll be able to achieve that.
Any other debate? Well, look, I mean, I think this is a great idea. The council is acting as a facilitator on behalf of the community. If the community chooses to proceed along these lines, it's cost neutral to us. But I think, there will be many times where a small or localised community wants to do something which is just slightly outside of what council normally does, and therefore shouldn't be a cost to the whole ratepayer base, but certainly the local community wants to do it, and we can facilitate that really by providing cash flow support. So I think it's a great idea. But as Andrew said, this is now over to the community to decide on whether they'd like to progress or not, and we will follow their feedback after the hearings panel. So I'll put the motion. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. And we are now going to break for lunch. We will resume the meeting